Well, good evening, everyone. I want to thank you all for joining us here tonight. I'm Pete Eberle. I'm with the Colorado Renewable Energy Society, or CRES. If you're not familiar with us, CRES and our local chapters provide education, policy advocacy, and community engagement that accelerate Colorado towards a carbon neutral future powered by 100% renewable energy. Founded in 1996, CRES is a statewide, nonpartisan 501c not-for-profit that is supported by our sustaining individual members, our business sponsors, as well as donations. You can sign up for our newsletter, event announcements, social media, and become a member or donor at www.cres-energy.org. That's CRES-energy.org. Also make sure to check out our YouTube channel, where we have over 255 videos that have garnered 1.4 million views. And we will have this video edited and posted here in the next few months. You will also be getting a link to the raw recording after tonight's presentation. Before I get into announcements, a couple quick thanks to our gigawatt and megawatt business sponsors that include Moss Adams, Sinton Instruments, Kelly Government Solutions, ProLift Rigging, Solaris Energy, Poudre Valley Rural Electric Association, and Platte River Power Authority. In terms of upcoming events, next week, Wednesday, September the 11th at 6 p.m., we will have a webinar titled Unpacking the Inflation Reduction Act, Green Home Improvement Incentives, and the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. That'll be presented by our partners from Clean Energy Credit Union. And then on Thursday, September 19th, 7 p.m. In Denver at the Alliance Center, our Metro Denver chapter, MD CRES, will be hosting How to Finance Climate Solutions. This will be an in-person meeting, but there will be a live stream as well. So if you're not in Denver, you'll be able to watch it remotely. Then on Tuesday, September 22nd, 6:30 p.m. at Odell Brewing Company up here in Fort Collins, we'll have our friends from the CSU Energy Institute give an update on biofuels. We have some other cool topics coming in October. We will be having a presentation on grid enhancing technologies to help expand the existing capacity, or the capacity of our existing transmission system. We have a policy update coming as well, and a presentation from the Colorado Energy Office on the geothermal roadmap. Details on those will be posted to cres-energy.org once we get those finalized. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand off the baton to Steve so he can tell us about the RTO expansion into the Western Interconnection. So Steve, the baton is yours, so the mic is yours.
Good evening, everyone. Really appreciate the time with you all. I'm Steve Johnson, Senior Director of Markets Administration with Southwest Power Pool. I've been with Southwest Power Pool just 4 years as of a couple weeks ago. Had a 20-year career in Colorado. Prior to that, 15 years in the Front Range, working for Western Area Power Administration there in Loveland. And then the last 5 years, still working for Western Area Power Administration, but over in their Montrose, Colorado office before leaving and coming over here. So had an exciting opportunity to be part of the team that is working to bring organized energy markets to the West. And yeah, excited to be here. So we'll go ahead and get going. So for today's topics, basically what we're going to be going through is just a high level, what is an RTO, and really using SPP as an example to dig into some of those details, but how they came about and what SPP is today. We'll talk about the renewables in SPP in our current footprint, and then preparing for the future. What does that look like for us, which includes RTO expansion, which I know is one of the main topics on everyone's mind. So history of regional transmission organizations, it actually all started back in the 90s with FERC orders 888 and 889. So 888 basically required vertical utilities to start to unbundle or deregulate, if you will, and offer up open access to their transmission systems. 889 was just the functionality to make that happen, basically. It started the open access same time information system. That's what started it all off. After that, FERC Order 2000 came along, and that really laid the ground rules of what an RTO should be. So while there were independent system operators that were coming along prior to that, such as the California ISO, regional transmission organizations, those multi-state organizations really are outlined in FERC Order 2000. And FERC's desire at the time was that entities would voluntarily form these regional transmission organizations, these bigger, broader footprints to help at the time actually just incent better competition and better rates for end-use ratepayers. At that time, while renewable energy was starting to catch a foothold, there really wasn't a major point, if you will, to stand up an RTO. And then in 2004, actually SPP was approved as a regional transmission organization. It took a full 10 years before the full day 2 organized market was stood up. And there was iterations prior to that. First, they basically created the common tariff. That's what essentially established the RTO in the original footprint. Then they went to a real-time energy imbalance market similar to the one operating in Colorado today with the Western Energy Imbalance Service. And then in 2014, actually stood up the full-blown day 2 organized market that we are currently operating in our footprint in the East Interconnection and will be bringing to the West. So graphically, gives you a good idea of where markets are and are not. And you see Southwest Power Pool right here in the center. Interestingly enough, we connect to the Western Interconnection with 7 direct current ties. There are 2 asynchronous interconnections. They both operate at 60 hertz, but they're not synchronized. There is a definite line right along that line you see on the western edge of Southwest Power Pool. So again, while they operate at 60 hertz, they are not synchronized. And it does create a pretty tight constraint today. 1,320 megawatts bidirectionally is what we can transfer back and forth. But there's a huge opportunity there that we will discuss as we go through. So who is SPP? Standard 501c6 nonprofit corporation. Again, we're one of the 9 regional grid operators that you see listed there. We do have 114 members in 14 different states, and that's about to expand. We really are that air traffic controller for the high voltage grid, and I'll get into what that means exactly here in a second. We run a large balancing authority. Our entire footprint is in one large balancing authority, and we use that organized market not only to provide a robust and liquid market for entities to sell and buy energy, but we use that to actually operate the system. And then we also have a large planning function. We do a lot of regional planning as well. So what do I mean by air traffic controller? Well, air traffic control does not own airplanes, airlines, airports, any of that. And likewise, Southwest Power Pool does not own the utilities, generators, transmission lines, nothing. All we own, frankly, is the software to operate the system. And in fact, Southwest Power Pool has the largest data center in Arkansas currently. We do not own the sky that we monitor. SPP doesn't own any of the land. We direct air routes, or excuse me, air traffic control directs the air routes and planes and passengers and everything. It keeps everybody safe as they're moving through the air. And very much the same thing. Our grid operators monitor and direct that regional, that higher overview bulk power grid to ensure load is being served and to ensure the transmission system is reliably operated at the same time. So our major services, facilitation, what does that mean? The reality is with our governance structure, that is one of the things we're most proud of. We are a stakeholder-driven organization. Everything that we do from a market design standpoint, operationally, et cetera, goes through our stakeholder process. We facilitate it. We provide the expertise. We may provide some of the planning to come up with results for our shareholders or our stakeholders to consider, I should say, not shareholder, stakeholder. And then ultimately our various working groups, they come up with the market designs, they come up with the operational criteria, they come up with the planning criteria. There are certain things that are delegated to our regional state committee, resource adequacy, transmission cost allocation, and our congestion hedging paradigm. Those are all actually delegated authorities to our regional state committee. So our state regulators actually have direct control over some of the major cost points of the RTO operation. And then we get into the more, what I'm going to call traditional operation, reliability coordination. I actually was a reliability coordinator working out of the Loveland office there for several years back in the early 2000s. And you really are like an air traffic controller in that position. You don't control any generation directly. You don't control any transmission directly. But what you do have is a wide area overview of the entire system, much broader view than your typical transmission operator has. They only see their own specific system. And with that wide area view, you ensure that operations are being coordinated in such a way that entities aren't harming their neighbors, and that entities that are in trouble get the help they need. The balancing authority really is just what it sounds like. You're constantly balancing load and generation on a 4-second basis. And then our transmission and tariff administration, essentially when entities join the RTO, we take over what they call functional control. But it's a little bit of a misnomer because we are not physically controlling the transmission system. The transmission operators still are. So for example, when Platte River comes into the RTO, they're still going to have system operators. They're still going to be opening and closing breakers. They're still going to be managing their own maintenance activities at the power plant, on the transmission system, etc. But what we do is we manage that FERC Order 889 piece. So to the extent that there is transmission service to be offered up, free and open access, we manage that whole process to ensure that the entities that want to move energy across the transmission system can do that effectively and efficiently. Then we are the market operator. As I mentioned, we operate a day ahead in a real-time market today, and that's what we will be bringing across the interconnection into the Colorado, Wyoming area. It's essentially a day ahead market. By and large, the vast majority of the energy is traded in the day ahead in that paradigm. But then during real time, we operate a 5-minute security constrained economic dispatch. So every 5 minutes, we are recalculating what the transmission system looks like, what load is, what generation is available, what's been offered in, et cetera. And we're always calculating that most efficient cross of those two axes between supply and demand to be able to serve load as economically as possible while taking into consideration all the various constraints that we have to, because we don't have a copper sheet transmission system. There are real constraints out there that we have to manage to ensure we don't cause an unreliable condition that could lead to all kinds of problems, including blackout. Transmission planning, we do the regional planning across our entire footprint. And that really ensures that the right things get built in the right place to provide the most economic and reliability benefit that we can for a given facility. If it's not going to provide benefits, positive benefits, at least over a 1.0, if you will, cost benefit, then it won't get built unless it is truly just a reliability issue. Everything else, we always look for those things that can solve both the reliability issues that we have and provide that economic benefit to be able to deliver the lowest cost resources to load. Then we also have a really robust training program, not only for our system operators, but for our members as well. Getting into the market is a huge lift. There's a lot to learn. It is a very complex system that we operate. At the end of the day, it works really well, but it is a major shift in how things are done. from how they're historically done. So we've got a pretty robust training group that works with our stakeholders as they're coming on, so they can learn everything from what we call bid to bill. So from the front end, where they're offering in generation and bidding in their loads, all the way to what do the settlement statements look like and how do you decipher those. So those are our major services that we provide. So our top priorities, first thing is make sure we have adequate generation to maintain reliability under those normal and extreme conditions. Our system has an amazing amount of wind online every day, and there's always a certain amount of uncertainty that goes with that. We've developed some pretty amazing tools. I will say I've seen others develop some pretty amazing tools. I was in Public Service Colorado's office, I don't know, at least 10 years ago, and it was amazing the tools that they had developed in-house to help manage their wind fleet. And I know they've gone way beyond that, and we have as well, but that is definitely something that has been a game changer as we have incorporated more and more of the intermittent generation types. Another thing that we spent a lot of time on, I mentioned we have the largest data center in Arkansas. We are constantly working to protect the grid from cyber attacks. We're extremely computer intensive, as you can imagine, operating all these systems. And we have a lot of touch points out there on the system. They're once removed the way we operate. We don't directly touch a generator or a transmission line breaker, but there's still a lot of entry points. We have a lot of touch with member systems, various things, and cyber security is tied for our #1 risk that we work to manage. We get transmission built, but not directly, and I'll get into that in a minute, but through our planning processes and our cost allocation process, we are able to get new transmission built to connect that new generation and load. As of late, we've been seeing a lot of things like data centers all across the country. We're seeing some in our own footprint as well. So it really is both sides of the equation. As mentioned earlier, we work to facilitate these wholesale markets. They're constantly evolving as resources change out, as new technologies come along, as new FERC orders come along, et cetera. It is a constant evolution of market systems. And then, of course, we're working to reduce those costs and the issues we see with the extreme weather events. And a lot of that's going to be mitigated by growing this larger footprint. Things that are outside of SPP scope. We don't cite the transmission. That's up to the local planning processes and utilities. We don't cite or plan generation. That is definitely in the utilities purview. We do have resource adequacy requirements that need to be met, but we don't tell utilities how they have to meet them. We just tell them what the requirements are, and then they go work with their various regulators to make that happen. We don't actually build the transmission or generation. Again, we can get it funded. We have a whole mechanism in place that all the stakeholders have agreed to, but at the end of the day, it's a utility, or in the case of Order 1000 projects, if they happen to qualify for that, and they're put out for competitive bid, and then the winning bid builds it. Same thing with permitting. We don't get involved with that. That is up to either the utility or the entity that is actually constructing that facility. So one thing that we run into a lot, because we're doing a lot out in the West, is, well, what is the Western Energy Imbalance Service? What is Markets Plus? What is the RTO? Is Markets Plus the same as the RTO? We get all kinds of iterations like that. So I really like this slide because it really shows the difference. So the Western Energy Imbalance Service is just that. It is a real-time only energy imbalance service. So to the extent entities have generation they're willing to move, then they will offer that in, and the market will essentially create a real-time solution every 5 minutes. And to the extent there's an imbalance out there to move around, it will look for that least cost dispatch. So, for example, Piesco joined, I think it was April of 23, and almost instantaneously we saw hundreds of megawatts of wind starting to flow into the Western Area Power Administration Balancing Authority, because we had removed transmission pancakes and the friction that exists between market operators, especially with intermittent resources. The old way of doing things that is currently still being done across the vast majority of the West, in one fashion or another, the imbalance markets have helped bring it a long way. But the reality is any trading that's done outside of that is hourly. So if Piesco were to sell 100 megawatts of energy to someone in another balancing authority, they would have to deliver that all hour, no matter what. So if they were betting that their wind was going to be at a certain level for an hour and 15 minutes in, it fell off, they would have to bring something else up to make up for that, to make that schedule whole. Where the imbalance markets, they redispatch every 5 minutes. So to the extent there was excess there that they could move, it would do that, assuming that is the cheapest resource, and it generally always is. And then if it falls away, well, in the next 5 minute interval, it would get pulled back and the other entity would have to bring resources up. So it really, really helps entities mitigate risk, if you will, and get the most out of these resources. And it also leverages a broader footprint, which helps dampen out some of those swings that I'm talking about. But far and away, you can see in the right-hand column, RTO membership brings everything to the table. Again, the energy imbalance services is just real-time energy only. Markets Plus adds a day-ahead unit commitment component, but that's it. No combining of tariffs, no combining of balancing authorities, et cetera. The RTO brings that all under one house and creates that large footprint that allows us to do things that's really hard to do with the 38 separate balancing authorities that you have in the West today. So the electricity market's like any other market. You have sellers and producers with a product, and you have buyers and consumers that need it. And the prices are driven by supply and demand. So essentially, entities bid in their load, and then they offer in their generation. Now, generally their load, they're going to serve their load, so they're pretty much a price taker, but not everyone. There are entities that may have price sensitive loads, and they can actually offer that in accordingly. On the resource side, the same thing. They can offer in whatever they would like. We have a market monitoring unit that kind of keeps an eye on that to make sure there's no gaming going on or no market power or anything like that. And then if things get stressed, we actually pull people back to what we call their mitigated offer. And all that is they have a formula they go through to show what their fuel costs were, what their marginal costs were, and they would actually be mitigated back to that value if things go awry. So there's many mechanisms in place to keep it liquid, but also keep it efficient, because I know, especially in the West, I lived through it, the California energy crisis back in the early 2000s. That was rough, and it was a flawed market design. They were learning. They were one of the first out of the box, and they've definitely figured it out since then. But a lot of the things, such as a market monitoring unit that every regional transmission organization has, actually came out of events like that. So those early pioneers, it was a little tough at times, but we've come a long way in the industry since that time. But again, for those that were around, they can remember some of the issues that we saw back then. So just quickly, the integrated marketplace, that's what we call the market in our RTO. So the key components, day-ahead market, like I mentioned, and most of the energy, the vast majority of the energy is all traded in the day ahead. We have the real-time balancing market that actually is used to operate the system and fill any voids that were left from the day-ahead process. And then we have a transmission congestion rights market. That's a super complicated topic. We could spend way more than 2 hours just on that. But briefly, what it is essentially it's how you realize the value of your transmission rights in an organized market versus a bilateral market. A bilateral market, if you own capacity on a transmission system, you inject it for $30 on one side of the transmission system rights that you hold, it comes out the other side at $30. That's the value of that transmission. So let's say you're able to procure wind energy for $10 out in Wyoming, but Denver is running really hot that day. And by the time you get to Denver, the actual energy price is $90 because they're having to run some gas to actually make up the last little bit. The reality is if you own firm transmission all the way in, well, your $10 energy it still only costs you $10 when you get to the other side. So if you're serving load, that's what you want. You want to be able to bring your more economical resources to your load and then realize the value of that $10 energy and not have to pay that high price. And the congestion rights actually allow you to do that. So you realize the value of that transmission. And I've actually got a slide coming up that'll really demonstrate this well. I know it's a little tough to follow. The products, we have plain old energy. We have, my slide will work, operating reserves. So as I mentioned, we operate a balancing authority in the Eastern Interconnection. We will be starting another balancing authority area in the Western Interconnection. So we'll end up with two. The one on the east peak loads about 55 gigawatts. The one in the west to start with will be about a tenth of that. Honestly, it would be around 5,000 or 6,000 megawatts. But we need all these ancillary services, if you will, to keep reliable operation going within the balancing authority. And then finally, those congestion rights that I just talked about. So marketplace benefits, since we turned it on 10 years ago, basically $10.2 billion in cumulative benefits. And that's just basically from removing friction within the market, removing those pancake transmission rates, and that 5-minute dispatch, always dispatching the most economical next megawatt. This last year, we saw a little over $3 billion annually. And so it's ratcheted up over time as we've grown. And we also have the lowest average wholesale rate as of 2023 in the nation. Now, it's the lowest, but they're close. I don't want to give the impression that it's half, but we definitely are running lowest average wholesale costs in the nation. That's because we sit on what I've heard explained, the Saudi Arabia wind, and I'll show that in a minute. And we've seen 1,000% increase from 2009. We're up to 35 gigawatts, a little over 35 now in 2024. Transmission, and this is the big deal, because while the state of Colorado does an excellent job within the state, working with its utilities to get the things built that need to be built, the interstate transmission system in and out of Colorado is not great, frankly. 3 of the 4 qualified constrained paths within the Western Interconnection are at the borders of Colorado and neighboring states. One to the north, to Wyoming, one to the west, basically that northwest corner into Utah, and then the Four Corners area. The only other one that is a qualified constrained path that we call within the West is actually between California and Oregon, right there on the California-Oregon border. So while, again, the state of Colorado has done a fantastic job within the state, interstate transmission is tough to build for various reasons. That is one thing that an RTO is really good at, because we work with, again, our regional state committee, utilities, et cetera, and we develop a regional cost allocation process to be able to go out and actually get things built. As we see renewable energy continue to expand, larger and larger footprints are what you need to be able to really leverage that resource. And again, I've got some slides coming up that'll demonstrate that. But you can see by the numbers, we've built a lot of transmission, and we've got a lot more we need to build, frankly, to make sure we get it built in the right place. And ideally, we start building some to connect that east-west tie. So I'm going to be shifting gears here, and we'll talk about some of the renewable portfolio that we have in SPP. So our energy mix, you can see over time, we were very coal heavy just 10 years ago. And over time, that has dwindled to less than half of what we were seeing. At the same time, you've seen our wind go from less than 10% up to 37%. And this is actual energy for the year. This isn't capacity. This is actually energy produced on an annual basis. So wind far and away is our #1 resource now. This year we're shooting over 38%. Looks like we might hit 39 by the end of the year. So again, you can see the trend over time. And yes, we do see a slight uptick in gas. As coal is coming down, we expect those to cross. There's just a certain amount, given today's technology and the transmission system, et cetera, there's just a certain amount of dispatchable capacity that has to remain online to keep us reliable. But I will tell you, if you'd ask people, including me, 10, 15 years ago, if we could push instantaneously over 30% especially with wind, because it is very intermittent, I would have told you no. I think we're going to have serious reliability concerns if we do that. The reality is we're serving 37, 8, pushing 39% on an annual basis with wind, and instantaneously we've seen right at 90%. Many hours, hour over hour, we're running in the 80s. And again, the tools we've been able to develop, the technology that has improved over the years, I have no doubt we'll be able to keep pushing this envelope. It's just one of those things that we've got to keep the plane in the air while we're rebuilding it. So if you look at all the organized markets across the country, SPP is #1 as far as integrating renewable energy into, or serving load, I should say, with renewable energy as a percentage of load. So again, it's because we sit on top of what has been lovingly come to be known as the Saudi Arabia of wind. We've got an amazing amount of renewable energy available to us, and we've actually got quite a bit of solar in the south that has yet to be tapped. So, and I can't wait for them to do it. It will definitely help us with our system operation, but we are the leader, and we've got some of the most advanced tools out there for managing uncertainty and looking out days in advance to ensure that we got the right resources online to manage the day that's coming up. So this is a great slide. It definitely has our footprint superimposed over an NREL map. And a couple points I want to make here is, #1, you've heard me say it enough already, but you can see we're sitting on top of some really wind-rich areas, especially if you look the other areas or the other maps off to the right. You see that purple, almost our entire footprint. But when you look to the west, southwest specifically, I mean, it's very solar heavy, no surprise there. But you've also got a 2-hour time difference. And when you put those resources against each other, our wind tends to blow harder at night. As it cools off and that jet stream kind of drops, our wind picks up and of course drops during the day, especially in the summer. It's very noticeable. Pretty inverse to what we see out of the solar system. And I've got some neat graphs coming up here to show that interplay. So one of the things we run into, as I mentioned, there's a certain amount of resource we've got to keep online to remain reliable. This is our wind profile in October of 2022. Just picked one of the more wild days. And you can see at about 8 o'clock in the morning, wind starts to fall off, completely inverse to our load curve. And it fell off hard between 8 and 12, or between 8 and 10, almost 11. We saw a 10,000 megawatt drop. And then that afternoon, right after peak, it started picking right back up. And those swings they're tough to manage. And again, the tools and processes we've developed allow us to do that. But there can be some super challenging days. We had one this summer, even with 35 gigawatts of capacity on our system, we were blowing less than 200 megawatts instantaneously, and we were down under 1,000 for several hours one day. And it's rare, but it definitely happens. And we've developed some amazing tools and processes to get through those days. However, if you take this curve and you throw a little solar on top of it, things get interesting. So this graph, we do a wind forecast every day. There's a daily report that comes out, and I was looking at this graph day after day in the summer. I thought, man, it'd be interesting to lay that in against some California ISO data, time shift it, make sure it's actually aligned properly, and see what kind of interplay we might get. And I knew August was our most interesting month. We tend to see the deepest troughs during the day in August. So I started looking on August 1st just to see if I could find a air quotes perfect day. I only had to get to August 5th to be able to find the perfect graph to demonstrate what the possibilities are. But a day's a day. It doesn't tell you a whole lot. So we took a whole year of data and graphed that. The hours are averaged. So it's every hour ending 1 for a month, every hour ending 2 for a month, et cetera, for all 24 hours. But you still see a very interesting dynamic here when you compare SPP's wind fleet to CAISO's solar fleet, just how complementary they can be. And, when solar's going down, wind's coming up, and vice versa, pretty much every month. There's definitely something there. It's just going to require some transmission for us to be able to leverage that. So while there's hours where we may have to curtail wind because we've got transmission constraints or we just don't have the load to be able to absorb it, and there's also hours out west where CAISO's in a very similar situation with their solar, and with some transmission in between, we can both help each other and really utilize and maximize the use of these facilities. So up to now, I've been talking about pretty much normal daily operations. The other thing, when you start looking at some of the major events we've had over recent history, just picked a day here where the California ISO was in energy emergency alert watch. Things were getting tight for them one afternoon. That same afternoon, our wind was picking up, and about the time they were really starting to have problems, and there was even a couple hours there where we had to curtail a little bit of wind just to manage congestion, transmission limitation issues on the system. And if we could have shifted west, it is something that would have helped mitigate, real operating issues with enough transmission out there. And when I say that, you don't have to build transmission all the way from Oklahoma to California. You've only got to get to where the old big coal plants used to be. If you get to Colstrip in Montana, if you get to the Four Corners area, anywhere in that western New Mexico, Four Corners area, if you tie into, just south Colorado Front Range. Think of what we could do down there around Comanche. And then you've got some transmission diversity that you can leverage as well. So maybe you've got issues on the Western system. You might be able to move it across the Eastern system and vice versa. You can really start seeing an interplay of what we could do if we start leveraging these footprints. And pointing this out to say, why is SPP looking west? Well, one, there's no market out there other than California. If you think of that slide I showed several slides ago that showed the various market footprints, it makes sense if we're looking to expand our ability to leverage these resources and manage that diversity. It would make sense to look in an area where there is no other market. There's also a huge amount of complementary potential between the two footprints. And that's one of the reasons we are looking west. So this, I mentioned I was going to show a slide that really showed what is transmission congestion. And this does a great job. Went out and picked a few days where we were having issues on the system in the west and in the east. So in 2020, summer heat storm, there was load that was being shed in the Nevada, Arizona area, Southern California area. Palo Verde, it's a trading index, it's a trading hub. It's actually where the nuclear plant resides there in Arizona, west of Phoenix, but it is an index. It's a trading index that a lot of energy marketing entities use for various trading purposes. Same thing with Mid-C, that stands for Mid-Columbia. That's basically the middle of the Columbia River. So it's central Washington area, and that's another large trading hub that a lot of these entities utilize for trading back and forth for a price index. So those are the two price indexes that exist in the West that are tracked by various entities like the Intercontinental Exchange, so you can get some pricing data, some historic pricing data. So that's what I did. Went and got that actually off the Energy Information website, DOE's website. And then we picked what would be the West Peak. So it's just beyond peak within the RTO, but trying to figure out where that max price would probably be. And you can see for the August 2020 summer heat storm, Palo Verde, where they were shedding load, they were trading for $1,500. SPP's RTO at the same time was clearing for $20. So the value of that congestion would have been, if you'd have had firm transmission capacity, you could have taken that $20 energy to Palo Verde. It would have cost you $20 in the SPP RTO, and you could have sold it for $1,500 in Palo Verde. Now, with enough transmission, those two numbers balance out. If you think about two lakes, if you think about, there's a facility there in Mount Albert, just out of Leadville, or there's an upper and lower reservoir where there's a pump storage facility. As you generate this, those lakes tend to levelize, right? I mean, they never do completely because it's pump storage, but if you could move enough water, you could get those two equal. And that's really what we're talking about here. You could levelize those prices across that broader footprint with enough transmission. So fast forward to February 15th, 2021, that's when we had our big winter storm that really, really harmed Texas. We did end up shedding some load in our own footprint. I will note that we saw some unprecedented energy transfers between PJM and MISO and SPP. Large market operators can make a lot of energy move when they have to. And we were seeing upwards of 16,000 megawatts an hour transferring between MISO and PJM, because PJM was not having the weather issues that we were in the Midwest. And then MISO was moving absolutely as much as they could through their system to us. I believe it's pushing 6,000 megawatts and really helped keep the lights on. But back to my point, you can see prices in SPP at that time, $2,800 a megawatt hour. Palo Verde was $325, Mid-C was $180. You can start to see a pattern here where if we had better transmission, where we could leverage that broader footprint, we can actually manage some of these major weather events that we're seeing, because they tend to last for days. They usually are 3 or 4 days long, and current storage technologies and whatnot just don't carry us through those. It's fantastic for normal operations most of the time, but we still have a ways to go with that technology to get to be able to cover those 3 and 4 day periods. Whereas in all the above, if we can get some transmission in the air, we can really help mitigate not only the operational issues, but some of the high price spikes these areas are seeing. But as you go through the winter storm, you'll see the 16th prices were a little better in SPP. And then by the time we got to the 17th, those prices balanced out because the system had pretty much stabilized east and west. So it's just a really good chart that shows the potential, if we can get some transmission east to west, to not only help mitigate these huge price spikes that we see when things really get bad, but also be able to keep loads served. Generally, you don't see the weather issue stretch all the way from, the West Coast or close to the West Coast all the way into the Midwest. It'll tend to move through, and we could leverage the footprints against each other to help manage and mitigate issues along the way. So preparing for the future, I kind of tipped my hat a little bit to, why is SPP looking west? The reality is we're seeing an evolving grid. Things that, people got into the power industry because it was a kind of a slow, sleepy, changed by the decade, barely type of industry to work in. And that is just not the case anymore. My nephew conned him into becoming an electrical engineer. I told him, I said, your generation might be the generation that just changes the world, on par with what the Wright brothers did, or even Nikola Tesla when he came up with polyphase AC. We're seeing things come faster, harder, and more complex than ever, especially in areas of distributed generation, dispatchable demand response, that cybersecurity risks we have to manage as we do all that. Things just continue to pick up pace. It's an exciting time to be part of this industry. The things specifically we're looking at, if we consider load, transmission, and generation, load growth. I mentioned earlier, we're seeing some data centers pop up, oil and gas exploration in certain areas up in the Dakotas. That's all load that has to be served. Generally, and this is especially true in the West, major load pockets are separated from generation. You have to build, wind and solar where the resources are. And that's especially in the case of wind, that's not necessarily where everybody wants to live. So we've got to figure out how to move that energy to market. So that gets us to the new transmission. To the extent we can remove those bottlenecks, remove that congestion, if you will, we can get the lowest cost generation to market, and keep it reliable. And then our fleet is changing out extremely fast. As I said earlier, we've got to keep this thing in the air as we rebuild it. And there's a lot of planning work and a lot of effort, resource adequacy arena to try and hit that sweet spot. We don't want to be so conservative that we're disincenting new technologies and the ability to continue to move forward, but we also don't want to have a major event that would also be a horrible setback. If you think of ERCOT, because they're isolated, they're their own grid, they couldn't actually leverage much help from us like we could from MISO, and like MISO could from PJM during the winter weather event. We do have some direct current connections because, again, they're their own asynchronous interconnection, but we can only put so much into their system because of those constraints. Transmission and a broad footprint really is key. So finally, RTO expansion into the Western Interconnection. This actually started almost 10 years ago, discussions about it. There was an effort known as Mountain West, all the Colorado utilities, and Wyoming, South Dakota, for the most part, PacifiCorp wasn't involved, got together and started talking about, hey, is there a way to get an organized market off the ground in the Rocky Mountain Front Range area? And ultimately that effort failed. Some of the group dropped out, but there was a core group that remained that really wanted to see if there was something they could put together. So they approached Southwest Power Pool and said, hey, let's at least get an energy imbalance market going. Let's get something going. Let's figure out how to make this work. So in the process of standing that up, they approached us and said, you know what, we want to go ahead and take another run at trying to stand up an RTO again. So 6 entities, I'll show you a map of them here in a minute, approached us, and we worked with them for a couple of years to work out the terms and conditions. There was a lot of complexity about how are we going to leverage direct current DC ties between 2 interconnections, between 2 distinct balancing authority areas with a single market. There's a lot of hair there that we had to work through to get to where we are today. But finally, the board approved the terms and conditions all the way through, and we got to work. So this kind of lays out the whole timeline that I just explained, and you can see that we are here. Arrow, it looks like we're almost done. The reality is the work just started. Now we're actually building the thing, getting systems and processes in place, and working with the expansion members to get all their information and data to us so we can get the appropriate models built, studies ran, et cetera, so that we're ready to stand up a balancing authority and market and go live in April of 2026. So what does that mean? We'll be the first interstate RTO operating in the Western Interconnection, first of all. The California ISO is a state agency. Their current governance allows them to operate in the state. In fact, their governance states that they will always act in the best interests of the California ratepayer. And that is the main problem everyone else has with joining the California ISO. I will tell you, if they had independent governance, there'd be a market, likely, very likely a market across the West, and would happen likely quite a while ago. But that has not changed. There's been several runs at that over the years. It may someday, I don't know. But for now, they're just an in-state RTO. So this will be the first interstate RTO operating in the Western Interconnection. It means increased renewable integration. As I mentioned, we flipped on just the simple energy imbalance service, and we started to see flows between Public Service Colorado and WAPA. The more we expand this footprint, the more you will see things like that happen because of the sub-hourly dispatch. And when you pile on the tools we have in the day ahead to get unit commitment correct, to get the uncertainty correct, et cetera, it really, really helps push those numbers as you've seen from our current footprint. That all leads to reduced commitment costs, reduced marginal costs. It gives us a construct to build out regional transmission so we can continue to push that envelope in that broader footprint. And we're constantly working on, again, between our stakeholders and various orders coming out of FERC and various state mandates, et cetera, the next generation of processes to manage the next generation of resources, distributed energy resources, virtual power plants, dispatchable demand response, storage, all those things. We are working on all that right now to figure out how to best make use of that and make it economical to bring to market and make it reliable so that we can go ahead and serve load. So finally, here's the footprint. You do see Public Service of Colorado is missing. I will tell you that they are involved in every market effort that I'm aware of in the West. They're paying very close attention to this. They are a current member of the imbalance service. Have been working in our Markets Plus initiative. They're following California's EDAM initiative. There's a Pathways initiative out there that's going on. They're plugged into everything. And I think they're waiting for things to mature a little bit to see what makes the most sense for them. Like I said, they're one of the front runners and leaders in renewable integration. And they're definitely very engaged out there in the industry, trying to push the envelope and make these things work. So I fully expect you will see them continue to come up with ideas and push forward on a timeline that works for them. But for now, you see we've got Basin Electric, Colorado Springs, Deseret Generation and Transmission Cooperative, Municipal Energy Agency of Nebraska, Platte River, Tri-State, and then 3 of the WAPA offices will be coming in and standing up this initial RTO footprint. So it'll touch Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, and Arizona. So while it's pretty skinny coming across Utah and Arizona, it does hit several states, and it does establish a beachhead for this organized market to grow. So with that was a lot. I'll go ahead and stop, and we'll open it up for questions.
Okay, sounds great. Got a couple here. If SPP helps / provides the operating reserve, what is the requirement of each member company to do the same? Seems we have heard PRPA suggests assets they need to build to meet reserve requirements. Are those different types of reserves? And thank you for any clarification that you might offer.
Sure. So I mentioned we are working on some of those models currently. We will have actual numbers soon, as they'll start coming in later this year into next year. But essentially, to put it in perspective, the difference in reserves. Yes, there's a certain amount of reserve that Platte River is going to have to bring to the table or purchase from the market. They do have to be able to cover their load plus their resource adequacy requirement. But if you look at the Western Area Power Administration Balancing Authority, which is roughly, I think now it's around 4 gigawatts. And I managed that balancing authority for several years, so I'm pretty intimate with it. In any given day, we needed about 100 to 150 megawatts of regulation online, just regulation, not even counting contingency reserve. The Southwest Power Pole footprint usually utilizes about 1%. So with the amount of volatility we have, we're able to manage that footprint with just a fraction of what we needed to run that smaller balancing authority. A lot of that has to do with the 5-minute sub-hourly dispatch. A lot of it has to do with the tools and processes we have in place that a traditional balancing authority just doesn't, and the fact that we have a broader footprint. So yes, Platte River will still have to bring some resources to the table. As I mentioned, there's things that we've got to have to keep things stable given current technology where we're at today. But it will become less and less over time as this footprint expands, and it will actually be less day one than they would otherwise have to carry in a traditional balancing authority.
Okay. With the $10 per megawatt wind example from Wyoming, when the Denver electricity was running 90 a megawatt hour, why doesn't the price of Wyoming wind utility increase beyond the $10 when there's such a higher cost in Denver based upon supply and demand?
Sure. So that was definitely a hypothetical, right? But generally what you run into today, you've got a couple things working against you in the current environment. So the entity that might own that wind might not have the transmission capacity even available to it to be able to move it down to Colorado if it wanted to. Let's say there's a Pacific Core merchant that said, yeah, I'd love to make a sale. I don't have the transmission capacity. I can't connect the dots. I can't put it together. They may simply not talk on the phone. They may not actually contact each other. That happens sometimes. Other times they may have the resource, but they just don't have the transmission to get it all the way into that pocket. So they have to run that more expensive gas. But typically it is a function of transmission friction. They might have to buy 3-4 legs of transmission today through all the various transmission providers. We're in an RTO footprint. That's all removed. You basically have your one transmission rate that you pay, and that gives you access to the entire footprint. Also, if that wind is offered into the market, it is automatically calculated. If it can deliver, it will deliver. So the market will remove that friction to the extent possible. But again, there's a lot of complexities there because it really depends on where it is, who owns it, do they have transmission capacity today? Can they get transmission capacity all the way down to the system? Because there may be somebody else that has the transmission that's not using it, that maybe it was offered up non-firm, but they weren't able to procure it in time. There's many things that happen today on that hourly basis that really just create friction to solve those issues. And then sometimes it is just a transmission constraint and you've got to run some more local generation. It's just where you end up.
Demand. Okay, thanks for explaining the mandate for the California system operator, and that's responsible for kind of stalling their expansion. Is there a chance that California, is anyone there looking to change that statute?
Oh, yes. It has been put in front of the legislature at least 2, if not 3 times over the last 10, 15 years. And I believe this next legislative session, there is something else in the 2025 session that might come up again. So far, like I said, they haven't been able to break that or crack that nut. But yeah, it's been tried more than once. It has yet to break through. And there's a lot of history behind that. I mean, again, for those that remember, state of California went through a mess. And there's just a lot of history there that the state doesn't ever want that to happen again. They want to keep control of their system.
Yeah, wasn't Enron involved in that?
Oh yeah, Enron and others. Yes.
Okay, next question here. Will SPP members within the Western Interconnect preferentially try to coordinate with each other first before working with the rest of the SPP? And I'm assuming the Eastern half.
So interestingly enough, I mean, each entity still pretty much manages its own system, if you will, to an extent, the way it always has. So I know you all are, many of you are in the Fort Collins area, so I'll pick on Platte River just a little bit. This in no way will affect anything locally that the cities that Platte River is responsible for want to develop or put in place. As I mentioned, the Regional State Committee actually is in charge of things like resource adequacy, transmission, regional and local transmission cost allocation, that whole paradigm, as well as how our congestion hedging works. But beyond that, local utilities still maintain autonomy of their resources. So typically, the bilateral stuff that you've seen, with major entities become more of your independent power producers are able to get more involved because you don't have the transmission issues to overcome that you do from a contract path standpoint prior to an RTO. So I don't think you're going to see any more or less leveraging. They're going to come up with resources they deem they want to serve their own load. Those are going to be offered in at whatever price they're worth. Many times with the production tax credits and things with wind, it's offered in at a negative price. So to the extent we have transmission, it will always run. It will always run first if we can get it delivered. And it may serve Platte River's load. It may serve somebody's load in Kansas. They won't necessarily know because it kind of disconnects the resource from the load. They have to offer in enough resource to serve their load. They bid in their load. But at the end of the day, the market's going to solve the most economic solution to serve that load. It may be Platte River's generation. It may be Tri-State's generation. It could be Nebraska Public Power District's generation coming across a DC tie. But it's going to be that most economical solution we can come up with. And again, I think it's important to understand, to the extent when you got the transmission, that renewable megawatt has at most a marginal energy cost. if there's any production tax credits applied, it's less than that. It's always going to run first.
Okay. Is United Power in the RTO?
Part of it is, part of it's not. So they are split between the two balancing authorities, WAPA and Public Service Colorado. So their WAPA piece, if you will, is coming into the RTO. I know they'd like it all to be in the RTO eventually. And of course, that requires transmission capacity and things. I'm not sure what their longer term plan is for all their load, but for sure the stuff that's in the WAPA balancing authority today is coming in.
Okay, and I would assume what's in Excel is technically in the energy imbalance by default.
Correct.
No. Okay.
Yeah, their entire load is in the energy imbalance market today. That's a great point, even though it splits balancing authorities.
Okay. Do you expect Markets Plus to lead to expanded DC transmission building between WEC and the Eastern Interconnect?
So that's a solid maybe. We'll be hitting it from two different angles. If for the footprint that's under the RTO's control, that'll be part of that regional planning process between the two footprints. When you look at the rest of the interconnection, Markets Plus it's a step forward. Like I mentioned, when you look at that one slide that shows the different services they bring, it doesn't remove all the transmission pancaking. So it doesn't allow an entity to, for example, let's say Platte River wanted to buy into a wind farm up in Wyoming. And today there's 3 different transmission providers they'd have to procure service from to make that happen. And because of all that pancaking and the fact that the middle leg, there wasn't capacity available, they couldn't put it together. In the RTO, to the extent that, that footprint is all in the RTO, essentially Platte River says, hey, I want to deem that particular resource up there as a network resource to my load, and we'll run a study. As long as the system can handle it, they've got it. They don't have to go out and procure all these specific distinct legs of transmission. We study it as a full-blown network. They continue to pay their network zonal rate, and that's it. So it really expands the ability to do that. Markets Plus stops short of that, so you probably won't see people using it for designated network resources. However, to the extent that entities can move energy, and especially in real time, and remove that friction through that energy imbalance service process, you may start to see more and more folks look east, be willing to invest in those transmission systems and start bringing that wind resource over. Because it's super complementary. Building more solar next to a huge solar area without being able to reach that broader footprint has diminishing returns, right? We need that broader footprint or the ability to store it, one of the two. I would say we probably end up with a combination of both ideally. So maybe for Markets Plus, I know there's entities looking at some projects out there, but for the RTO, it'll be based on studies. If there's reliability and economic benefit there, once we work through the regional cost allocation to make that happen. I will note, because we don't have our full regional states committee seated yet, part of the things we're working through with the DC ties was, well, how do we cost allocate future builds? And the reality is we can't make that decision. The current regional state committee couldn't make that decision without all the states that are impacted included. So what we said is we'll turn the thing on, we'll run it a couple of years, collect some data, have the full RSC set, and then we'll work on cost allocation across the interconnection. Whether it's AC or DC, it's still a cost allocation issue between the two footprints. And that'll be one of the first major things we tackle once we turn this thing on is starting to work through that process.
Okay. What are the plans or expectations of battery energy storage systems related to SPP with the West expansion?
So currently we've got a couple different things working. So it's not specific to the West, it's specific to the RTO, and it'll carry across. So you've got storage as a transmission asset, or SATOA. That's one thing we're working on. And then we're working on what we call market storage resources and the ability to potentially set up situations where they're being utilized for the market for frankly for economics. In the long run, how do we properly value that? What does the price formation look like in that situation? For storage as a transmission asset, that's different because it's actually part of someone's transmission revenue requirement. There's a guaranteed rate of return associated with that, so you can't also enjoy the arbitrage, if you will, of charging and discharging. It's literally you put a storage device in, say on the end of a transmission line, because the line is not quite big enough to cover a peak, but you can charge it up when it's not peak and then discharge it over peak to keep that line from overloading. So it's storage as a transmission asset. It's in lieu of building more transmission. That gets a guaranteed rate of return, doesn't necessarily get to play in the market. The other side of the equation is you could have entities, full-blown marketers trying to arbitrage that battery like they would frankly a pump storage unit today. Or is there some middle ground where the market can actually do a little more directing, utilize it as it needs it to really get the maximum efficiency out of the system, and then help these entities, understandably so, reap the benefits of their investment. So that's something we're working on right now. I mean, that's in process right now, and that will be coming over to the West as we expand.
Okay. Is the RTO transition guaranteed for Colorado, or are there roadblocks that could pop up between now and 2026?
First thing we got to do is get an approved tariff filing from FERC. So it's still in the hands of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to see if the tariff changes we have filed are deemed just and reasonable. Beyond that, obviously the state commission definitely has input. I know there's large concern regarding our generation interconnection queue and the process that Colorado has in place to be able to see through some of that fog and get the things built that need to get built when they need to get built. I will say we've made major strides in clearing out our queue. We expect it to be caught up, that backlog caught up that we've had going for years. By the end of this year, we just changed up our process. Basically, entities have to bring a lot more skin to the game a lot sooner, so that the projects that are real projects, they stay in and they move forward. But it weeds out a lot of the stuff that was causing all the restudies, that was causing things to slow down. But I know that's a very, very important point for the state of Colorado. I fully expect them to bring changes to our current process via our revision request process to try and incorporate some of those into our broader system. So yes, there's always bumps. First thing we got to do is clear FERC, and we're confident we will. Again, we're well underway with development and design, but it's never over until it's over, and even after it's over, that's really just the beginning. We'll continue to work with our stakeholders, state regulators, again, that regional state committee, as well as our utilities, as this thing continues to unfold.
Okay. Colorado SB 218 authorizes third-party virtual power plants on Excel's grid. Can a VPP on Excel's grid join the RTO? If so, will FERC 2222 apply, or the state law?
That's a great question, and I don't know. I'm going to have to get back to you on that one. And as far as something being able to join the RTO, they would have to pseudo tie in, be it a load or a resource. They'd have to have firm transmission out of the Excel area to the border of our system to be able to make that work. That's straight across, but to the extent that typically state law has to be met, federal law doesn't override state law, and if state law is more restrictive, then it's going to apply, and we'd have to figure out how to make that work generally. But To be honest, I don't know enough of the details to give an emphatic answer. I'd have to go look.
Okay. How involved has Xcel Energy how how involved has Xcel Energy been in these discussions? And I think you kind of answered that, but I'll let you re-answer it.
Yeah, they've been very interested along the way. They're still super interested in how to interact with the RTO, either between the imbalance market and the RTO, or between them directly and the RTO. They're paying very close attention to how things are being set up. And of course, their sister organization, Southwest Public Service, over in the Texas, Oklahoma area there, a little bit of New Mexico. They're an RTO member. So Xcel is an RTO member. They're very, very familiar with our systems and processes and stakeholder process, et cetera. So I'm sure that and this is an assumption, but I'm sure that from a corporate standpoint, they're paying a lot of attention through those eyes as well and keeping everyone informed. But like I said, I can't think of a single market initiative that they're not paying close attention to. And we work with them often, and we're going to have to get even closer with them as implementation starts, because the reality is they're going to be a neighboring balancing authority. So we've got a lot of metering, we've got transmission issues to work through because there's a lot of joint owned transmission, got to make sure that's managed properly, et cetera. So pretty much lockstep with them as we move forward.
Okay, how would RTO membership for Collins Utilities, just using an example within PRPA or under PRPA, affect our local time of day pricing?
It wouldn't. That is 100% a Platte River retail load decision. Basically, we're just on the wholesale side. We get the energy to the edge of their system, but we don't touch retail rate design whatsoever.
Okay. Do you have any thoughts on underground HDVC or HVDC, high voltage DC? There's been a lot of talk about burying such cable and interstate highway medians along rail lines, you know, to kind of avoid some of the pushback on new transmission.
Generally, the cost to build large underground transmission like that, and I know DC is different than AC. You don't necessarily have the Ferrante rise issues that you run into with AC, but generally it's 5 to 10 times more expensive to build. So that's historically been cost prohibitive. Do I necessarily think it's a bad idea, especially when you're looking at you know, some of the weather issues we're seeing, and you know, if you think about hardening the system, et cetera, going underground makes a lot of sense. But there's that trade-off. It's so expensive, it's cost prohibitive to get it built. But we could put something in the air and actually start moving this energy across the system. It's going to be a lot of those kinds of trade-offs. I'd love to see that technology somehow become cheaper and more reasonable, that we can do stuff like that, because man, it'd be a lot easier to manage. You have ice storms and tornadoes and all the issues that we see on the transmission system impact those, obviously, when they're underground.
Okay, here's a question, and I think you answered it in the last one, so I'm going to jump ahead. There's a discussion. We have been in discussion with Farmington Electric in New Mexico, who have said they're joining the SPP, but this isn't shown on your maps. Can you confirm?
Yes, so Farmington is coming in. Who you see on the map are the entities that are they have signed commitment agreements to turn over their transmission systems to the SPP, as well as certain financial responsibilities, you know, if this thing were to blow up for some reason. Farmington is in the WACM, the Western Area Colorado Missouri Balancing Authority. They are coming into the RTO. They're still trying to figure out what exactly, if they have facilities that actually meet the criteria to be considered transmission. and if they actually want to put it under Southwest Power Pool's functional control or keep it under their own local cost allocation paradigm that they have. But yes, Farmington is working with us. They are currently working on onboarding into the RTO. And we have several other entities doing that as well. United is another example. You don't see United listed here. They're a distribution utility. They're not bringing a transmission system, and again, they don't have that financial obligation if things go awry. But they're absolutely bringing their facilities that are in that WAPA balancing authority in. I should note, though, there is one. I realize we need to update this map. They're not listed, but we got to come up with a different color. Black Hills, South Dakota, and Cheyenne Light Fuel and Power. So two of the Black Hills affiliates. The third one is Black Hills, Colorado, down in the Pueblo area. That's in the PSCO Balancing Authority. They're not joining at this time either. They've actually chosen to try and stand up their own separate balancing authority and plan to interact with us on the seam, but they made the decision at this time that it wasn't the right time for them to move into the market. So there's a little hole up there too.
Okay. Is Excel's hesitancy due to their being the main supplier of balance and ancillary services in Colorado?
You know, I really don't want to answer on behalf of Excel. I know that at some point they know that they're going to have to make a decision. I think they really just want to see some of these things mature to see what really makes the best sense for them in the end. But honestly, I really would have to defer that question to them.
Okay. Let me see. I've got a couple questions that were emailed to me by a friend who had a conflict tonight. The first will be, does SPP as an entity or whole have any decarbonization goals or renewable energy goals, or is it all just about managing what the members are doing?
So those goals are left to the individual states and their associated regulatory bodies. Our goal is to be able to operate as reliably as possible and push that envelope, because that is pretty much the goal of every state that we're either working with or moving into. And frankly, it's a federal goal. So our goal is to make it work, to push the envelope from a technology standpoint, and keep the lights on while we help our members meet their individual goals within their states or within their local communities.
Okay. Along that lines, there's another question here. Will the electricity dispatched have green attributes associated with it, for tracking, for organizations that have these goals? And obviously in Colorado, you're supposed to be 80% by 2030. Is there going to be any sort of aspect to that to be able to track, okay, this was from a renewable resource, this was coal, this was gas, and so on and so forth?
So that is one of the beauties of an RTO. It does a couple of things. It provides absolute transparency from a pricing standpoint, from a deliverability standpoint. You can kind of see how things used to operate, and all of a sudden things change a little bit because friction's been removed. So they provide transparency. The other thing they do is they really, really are good at providing data. We collect tons of data. So part of the process, one of the things we filed is we are standing up a greenhouse gas tracking and reporting system. We are working, actually, as I speak, we have a greenhouse gas task force set up under our current market working group, because the state of Oklahoma needs something similar and the other states are going to follow. So because it's one RTO, it's working through our normal membership process. But Tri-State is the one that really needs it right now. So they brought what we call a revision request idea if you will, to the membership. The task force was stood up, and they're actually working on that greenhouse gas tracking and reporting program. So by the time we go live, we will have one in place.
Okay, great. What types of storage projects are planning to join the RTO? Are they mainly utility, or they're independent providers?
I'd have to go look at the queue to answer this definitively, but it's generally a mix. Most of the storage we're seeing, there is some standalone. The vast majority of what we're seeing is hybrid. Frankly, the last shot of the queue that I looked at, I would encourage you to go out on our website. There's actually what we call a GIQ dashboard. You've got to go in to the operating data. You can find this GIQ dashboard. In fact, Pete, if you want, we can catch up later and I can walk you through how to get there real quick if you want to point people to that later, because there's a couple of rules in the universal rules in the world. Airports and hospitals are always under construction, and RTO websites suck. Hopefully we're going to be building new ones soon, so hopefully it's better, but it's hard to navigate. So I would be glad to help you find that.
Okay.
Generally, we're seeing a lot of hybrid. There is some standalone. We see a lot of independent work in the RTO because, like I said, you really remove a lot of the constraints from a transmission requirement standpoint, but it's both.
Okay, great. I do have before I ask this one question, I have a question, and this is in terms of, in the market, people are bidding in their resources, and you're always going to choose the most economic resource to fulfill a need versus the lesser economic resources. Is that correct?
Until you hit a transmission constraint or some other system constraint.
Yeah,
yes, that is correct.
Okay. So the question here is, where, and maybe this is something that's out there, but where would like an aeroderivative gas turbine live on that cost stack relative to other resources? Single cycle, combined cycle, wind, solar, battery.
Correct. Yeah, generally it's going to be above all those. Again, there's what we call reliability unit commitment. There's a certain amount of dispatchable capacity we need to have online, and whether that's met by an aeroderivative or whether it's met by a battery, we need those attributes. So as more and more of those dispatchable, resource types come on that are non-carbon emitting, great. We just need something we can move when we need to move it. But generally, absent any reliability unit commitment requirements to provide those resources we need to keep everything up and running, that's always going to be towards the top of the stack. And there's a range because it depends on what it costs them to have gas delivered. I mean, if you're in an area where gas is frankly stranded, it's going to be a much lower price than somewhere that has to use pipeline gas. But generally, that's all going to be still more. It's going to have more than a $0 marginal energy cost, which at most is what a renewable facility is bringing to the table.
Okay, great. Okay, looks like a follow-up question. Is the hybrid storage being used to bridge the 15 minutes that gas plants take from cold start to load?
Okay, it's a great question. I can't tell you what each individual utility what their business model or business plan might have been to bring it on, but generally, my understanding is it's literally for load growth. It's not necessarily to bridge that gap per se. It's to provide maximum resource during the hours where likely it's going to be the most economic to serve. If we see the solar build out in our system, last I looked, we had about 8 gigawatts of solar in the queue, or no, not in the queue. We've executed interconnection agreements. We desperately need it. You saw those graphs. So if that storage is enough to get us to where that wind curve is picking back up, then we don't even care about the gas turbine. And I think you're going to see quite a bit of that. If we have 4 hour storage on the end of a solar plant, that'll get us into our win curve and life is good as a system operator.
Okay, that's good to hear. Well, that's the end of the question. So I'm going to go ahead and cut it off there because I know it's getting late where you are in Central Time Zone. But Steve, I want to thank you again for, educating us on, what we're going to be dealing with here in Colorado. And it sounds like it's a good thing. Hopefully we can get through road bumps and keep the good things that we have going, like our interconnection process, and kind of make sure that we're, everyone's a winner. I will go ahead and follow up with you on getting to that, the GIQ dashboard, and then I can get that out to the folks. Well, thank you again, and I want to thank everyone for joining. Just a reminder, you will get a link to the recording after, it should get to you by tomorrow morning, just the automated email. And if you have any questions, just feel free to email the info@crest-energy.org, or most of you, I think, have my email. It's on the website too. So thanks again, and Steve, thank you one more time. Much appreciated.
Absolutely. Again, appreciate it. And I hope everyone has a great evening.
Yep, you too. All right. Good night, everyone.